Photography in remote places has been my life's work for as long as I can remember. Most people clock in. I pack my gear and disappear into the middle of nowhere. That's the job. I live for those shots you can't fake. I've slept in canyons, on mountain ridges, and once in a snow cave, I dug myself when a storm rolled in faster than I expected. Point is, I don't spook easy. If anything, solitude is the thing I crave most. Back in August of 2021, I was working on a project in the Great Basin Desert. That area near Ely, Nevada is one of the loneliest stretches I've ever walked into. Vast salt flats, jagged brush, and nothing but heat shimmer during the day. At night, it's like being dropped onto another planet. Cold, endless. Stars layered thick enough to swallow you whole. I'd been driving dirt tracks, hiking with my pack, scouting locations. My plan was to set up near some striking formations, catch golden hour and early morning light, and move on. For 2 weeks, that was my rhythm. Lonely roads, lonely campsites, but I was fine with it. I knew my routes, carried maps, backup GPS, and more water than I'd ever need. On the 5th day, I found something that didn't fit. There aren't many trees out there, not the tall ones anyway. Mostly sagebrush, stunted junipers, the occasional twisted pine if you're high enough. But I came across a lone tree, oak, maybe, that stood apart from everything else. Wide trunk, branches stretched like it had clawed through years of storms to survive. What caught my eye, though, wasn't the tree itself. It was the chains. Rusted iron chains hung from the branches, thick, heavy, industrial. Some were looped through higher limbs, dangling several feet, their ends corroded. Others had been wrapped tight around the trunk years ago, so long ago the bark had grown over sections, swallowing the metal into its skin. I set my pack down, walked circles around it, took photos from every angle. The desert was empty for miles. No ranch fences, no old mining rigs, nothing that would explain why someone lugged steel chains this far out just to bind a tree. I remember thinking it had to be ranching gear, maybe some forgotten corral marker, maybe a tether point for something. Still, I couldn't shake the wrongness of it. The desert is full of old relics, sure, but this felt staged, like someone had meant it to be found. I told myself not to overthink it. I'd seen weirder things in my line of work. Abandoned sheds, graffiti in the middle of nowhere, even a row of broken TVs dumped in a canyon like some strange shrine. People leave their marks in the wild, but chains embedded in living bark, that one stuck with me. I camped close by, maybe 200 yards from the tree. My plan was to get shots at sunrise, when the light would cut across the basin, and throw those chains into stark relief. I spent the evening cooking freeze-dried pasta on my little stove, sipping instant coffee, sorting through the day's photos. The desert was quiet, save for a lone coyote and the soft hiss of insects in the scrub. I remember leaning back, watching the sky. Nights like that were why I did this. I set my alarm for before dawn and crawled into my sleeping bag. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. At first it was faint. A metallic clink so soft I thought it was part of a dream. I readjusted in the bag, listening harder than I ever had before. Another clink, then a faint scrape, now metal dragging on bark. I sat up, unzipped the tent just enough to poke my head out. The night was dead calm. No wind. Stars burned overhead. My eyes went to the tree. The chains swayed. Not wildly, just enough to catch the starlight. I froze, watching. My first thought was coyotes. Maybe they brushed the chains passing by. But the sound wasn't coming from ground level, it was higher. Like lynx were rubbing against a branch overhead. I listened for paw steps, for breathing anything. Nothing. Just the slow creak of chain shifting against bark like someone tugged it and let go. I closed the tent, Sat there with my flashlight in one hand and my camera in the other. Minutes dragged. Finally, the noise stopped. I told myself I'd imagined it, or maybe the temperature change was making the links contract. Move a little. Science always has an explanation. The next day, I shot what I came for. Wide frames of the tree against the basin horizon. Close-ups of the bark swallowing rust. I tried not to think about the noise from the night before, but it lingered in the back of my mind. By evening, I debated moving camp. Part of me thought, you got the photos. Leave it. But another part wanted to prove to myself that it was nothing. Just physics. Just nerves. So I stayed. Same routine. Cook, sip coffee, check gear. This time I kept my recorder app running on my phone before I went to sleep. At 1:30 a.m., I woke again. The sound was back. Clink. Scrape. A faint rattle like lynx brushing wood. I grabbed my phone, checked the recorder. The app picked up static, distortion, like interference but no clear sound. The chains swayed again. This time I unzipped the tent fully, pointed my flashlight. The beam caught rusted metal. The chains were swinging slightly, but the air was still. Not a breath of wind touched my face. Then I heard it. Clear, loud enough to erase doubt. A chain pulled tight, like someone yanking hard and holding. The sound reverberated through the clearing. My light shook, but I saw nothing. No figure, no animal, just swaying links. I ducked back inside, zipped the tent, and sat with the knife from my cook kit gripped in my hand until dawn. I left before the sun even cleared the horizon. Packed my gear fast and shoved my camera into the bag. My whole body buzzed with the urge to get out. I looked back once before I left. The tree stood the same as before. Chains rusted, bark scarred, silent in daylight. I almost convinced myself it was nothing more than a trick of the night. But weeks later, when I developed the film, I saw something I couldn't explain. One frame showed the chains stretched taut, angled outward, like they were being pulled by invisible hands. My memory was sharp. I never saw them like that. Not once. But the negative didn't lie. I showed the photo to a fellow photographer. He laughed and said, "Looks staged. Did you set it up to spook clients?" I didn't bother arguing. Explaining would only make me sound crazy. But I know what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see. Chains that moved with no wind. A pull that echoed in the night. A photo that captured something my own eyes couldn't. In the silence of the desert, you learn the land doesn't belong to you. And sometimes what's left behind still has a grip on the living. You drive long enough, you learn the signs. What's part of the road and what's not supposed to be there. Elk at dusk. A car limping on a spare. Fog rolling low across valleys. That's all normal. But the fog that settled over Lolo Pass that night was something else entirely. It wasn't just thick. It swallowed light. I was running west with a light load, nothing urgent. Weather reports had warned of patchy fog, which usually just means you keep your distance and keep your wits about you. But by the time the highway curled into the forest, the mist didn't break in patches. It became a wall, heavy and still. My headlights stopped working like headlights. They lit nothing but a flat, glowing sheet right in front of my hood. I eased down, hands firm on the wheel. This was the kind of fog where mistakes happen. Too close to the shoulder, too quick with the brakes, and the night doesn't forgive you. There's a turnout I've used before, wide enough to tuck a rig without blocking anyone. I guessed where it was and let the tires crunch onto the gravel, slow until the truck sat square. I killed the headlamps, cracked the window, and let the silence come in. Out of habit, I keyed the mic. "Dispatch, 607, pulling off near 170, fog's too thick." Static answered. Not surprising. These passes swallow radio and cell service like they're nothing. I poured coffee from the thermos, listened to the metal tick of cooling brakes, and told myself I'd wait it out. It was just another night. Then I saw a flashlight beam cutting across the fog. At first, I thought it was a stranded motorist. The beam moved slow, left to right, as if someone were searching. I waited for a voice to follow it, but none came. Just the light, drifting and steady. I told myself a reasonable story. Maybe a hiker caught out too late. Maybe someone who'd slipped down a dirt spur. I grabbed my maglite, stepped down, and took a few cautious steps. The fog swallowed everything. My own beam stopped 10 feet out. The other light froze, holding in place. I called, "You okay?" My voice came back thin, chopped by the mist. No answer. I tried again. "I've got a radio, need help?" The beam dipped, then rose. Not a signal, not anything that made sense. And while I stood there trying to read it, 2 more lights flicked on. One to my left, farther back. One to my right, closer. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Everything inside me went tight at once. Stranded people yell, they wave. They don't appear in silence, triangulating you like prey. I backed up, one slow step at a time until my boots touched gravel. Then I slid into the cab, locked the doors, and killed the interior light. I kept it cool on the outside, but inside, it felt like I couldn't catch a full breath. Through the windshield, the beams began to advance, slow enough to be walking. But I heard nothing. No crunch of gravel, no drag of brush, no voices. Just the growing brightness of 3 lights moving closer. I grabbed the air horn cord and yanked. The blast punched the fog like a cannon. The lights cut out instantly. Gone. The blackness that replaced them felt heavier than before. I waited, hand wrapped tight on the lanyard. Nothing. I pulled it again. Still nothing. That's when I heard a faint metallic clink from the right side of the truck, like a ring of steel touching another. Just once. Sharp enough that my skin prickled. That was enough. I turned the key, let the engine growl back to life, eased the truck forward until the trailer cleared the turnout. Then I pulled onto the road and drove slow, steady, like you do in snow when mistakes get punished. The fog pressed hard, but 10 minutes later it thinned enough to show 20 yards ahead instead of 6. The relief was automatic. I didn't even notice my shoulders drop until they did. By dawn, at a cafe down the road, I called Highway Patrol. The trooper didn't laugh or tell me I'd imagined it. He said they'd had other calls about phantom lights on that stretch. Sometimes hikers, sometimes tricks of fog, but usually nothing left behind. That's what unsettled me most. If it was people, they left no trace. If it was something else, I had no category for it. Either way, the choreography, the way those beams blinked on in a triangle, didn't fit anything I'd seen in all my years driving. I keep telling myself a simple truth. Fear didn't steer me that night. Caution did. I stayed in the cab, steel and glass between me and the fog. And maybe that's why I'm here telling you this now, instead of someone reading about a driver who vanished on Lolo Pass. I've been living the van life dream for a while now. Traveling across the country, working remote jobs, chasing freedom and the kind of views that don't fit inside 4 walls. By May 2020, I was deep in Idaho, parked along the Sawtooth Wilderness. I'd done this 100 times before, pulling off into forest clearings, cooking simple meals on a little propane burner, sleeping with the windows cracked open to the smell of pine and the chorus of crickets. I wasn't new to solitude, and I wasn't afraid of it. In fact, I loved it. But this particular stretch of wilderness gave me one of the few moments where that love shifted, where solitude felt more like exposure. I'd parked my van near a trailhead. the kind of place where maybe 1 or 2 cars come through in a day. Sunset had painted the mountains orange, and I remember thinking, this is exactly why I live this way. I ate, read a little, and eventually crawled into bed. When darkness fully settled, I noticed it, a flicker in the distance through the trees. It was warm, orange, a campfire. It was odd because the fire was far, at least a mile into the clearing, nowhere near the road. Most campers I've met out here pitch tents within walking distance of their cars. But I thought that someone just wanted privacy. I kept watching it from my cracked window. The flames were small but constant. No voices carried, no shadows moved across it. After a while, I convinced myself it wasn't strange, rolled over, and went to sleep. By the second evening, I'd nearly forgotten about it. But when darkness fell, there it was again. Same exact place, same unwavering burn. I knew I shouldn't have, but I had to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and started toward it. The air was damp, the kind of chill that clings to you. When I reached the meadow, the fire was nothing more than glowing coals. A single folding chair sat by the log. The ground around it was bare dirt, no gear, no tent. I touched the chair. It was still warm. Whoever had been here hadn't left long ago. But I stood there alone, with my beam sweeping across empty grass. I didn't linger, just turned and walked fast, that crawling feeling chasing me the whole way. I debated moving camp entirely, but laziness, or maybe stubbornness, kept me put. I told myself the fire belonged to a hiker, maybe even a ranger. Still, I locked my van that night with more care than usual. Sometime after midnight, I woke to silence. Not the normal silence of the woods. This was heavy. I looked toward the meadow. Sure enough, the fire burned again. I was about to roll over when I noticed something worse. My passenger door wasn't shut, just slightly ajar, the seam of light from the inside dome barely visible. I know I'd locked it. I always lock it. I grabbed the wrench I kept under my mattress and checked every corner of the van. Nothing was missing, but the glove box was open, papers scattered. I slammed the door shut, hit the locks, and sat in the driver's seat until dawn, wrench in hand. At one point, I swear I heard breathing, low, like someone standing just outside the thin metal walls. But every time I looked out, the trees swayed empty. At first light, I drove. I didn't even stop to make coffee. I just turned the key and didn't look back at the meadow. I didn't camp alone again for a while. I stayed in RV parks, around families, people who waved good morning. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe the door hadn't latched, maybe the fire was just a coincidence. But it didn't feel like a coincidence. When I finally had the guts to go through the dash cam footage, something I'd only installed for insurance purposes, I found something that made my stomach twist. On the playback, before I even cut the engine, the fire was already burning in the distance. I hadn't noticed it then. I sat frozen at my laptop, watching frame by frame. The fire glowed, and at the edge of the frame, just outside the fire's glow, was a silhouette. Tall, slender. The silhouette of what looked like an old man, bent slightly forward. I hadn't seen him that night. Not once. I shut my laptop and sat there shaking, knowing I'd never go back to that stretch of the Sawtooths again. Now, if I ever spot a lone fire burning night after night in the same place, I'll keep driving, because I still don't know if that campfire was meant to draw me in or to remind me someone was already watching. I've always been the kind of guy who finds excuses to wander where I probably shouldn't. Not in a criminal way, just curiosity. I hike, I film with my drone, I explore odd corners of maps nobody else pays attention to. That May of 2021, I was in Nevada, outside Tonopah, with nothing but time on my hands and a couple of freshly charged drone batteries. The desert out there is a different kind of quiet. No sound but wind scraping against rock and your own boots on sand. I liked it for the stillness. It makes anything unusual stand out more. That's how I found the fence. It wasn't a normal ranch fence. It wasn't a line of barbed wire meant to hold cattle. It looked like something that had been put there a long time ago, patched up with rusted posts, barbed loops, and rows of keep out signs that didn't match each other. Some were printed metal, sun-faded. Others were hand-painted on scraps of plywood. A couple were so weathered I couldn't read them anymore. And then there were the things tied to the wire. At first I thought they were wind chimes or scraps of fabric, maybe from bored hikers. But when I got closer, I saw they weren't random. There were bones wired together like crosses, feathers bound with twine, and bits of tin cut into rough shapes. Some dangled in the wind, some were jammed tight into the wire, like someone wanted them to stay there forever. I'll admit, I thought it was perfect drone footage material. I unpacked my DJI, ran through the pre-flight checks, and sent it buzzing up. The screen lit with that bird's eye view of endless desert, but the fence cut across it like a scar. Past the fence, the landscape wasn't just empty brush. There were odd shapes, patches of dirt that didn't match the terrain. I dipped the drone lower, camera steady, and realized they were dugouts. Mounds of earth, like someone had shoveled out pits and tried to disguise them. At first I figured they were just collapsed mines. Nevada's full of them. But then I angled closer to one of the pits. That's when movement caught my eye. Someone rose out of the dirt. A man, coated in sand like he'd been buried there, pulled himself upright. The drone's gimbal locked on him, tracking as if it knew I wanted a closer look. He didn't move at first, just stood there. Then another figure climbed out of another pit 20 yards away. And another. They weren't doing anything but standing, looking directly at the drone. That was the first time I felt something like dread. I mean, I was out there alone. I swung the drone wide, pulling altitude to get a bigger picture. The screen showed half a dozen, maybe more, scattered across the fenced land. None of them moved except to tilt their heads like they were tracking the drone. Then the feed cut to black. No static, no weak signal warning. Just dead. I yanked the controller tight against me like that would help. The drone wasn't cheap, and I didn't want to leave it behind. I stuffed my gear into my pack and jogged down the wash where I thought it had landed. That's when I saw something tied to the fence that hadn't been there before. A new totem. It was a stick figure. Literally, a stick lashed into the shape of a body, wired tight to the barbs. It was fresh, the twine still clean, and it swung slightly like it had just been placed. I stopped. At that moment, I knew without proof that someone was out there with me. I didn't grab the drone. I didn't even look for it. I turned, hiked fast back to my car, and drove straight to Tonopah. On the drive out, I kept expecting headlights to bloom in my mirror, some rusted Mad Max-style pickup pulling onto the dirt road behind me. But the road stayed empty. At the sheriff's office, I tried to explain. The guy at the desk listened like he'd heard it before. "Desert squatters," he said, flipping a form toward me. "You probably spooked a camp. But the thing is, there was no camp. No tents, no supplies, no vehicles. Just pits in the dirt and people coming out of them." He didn't write that down, just saw trespassers beyond marked property. That night, I crashed in a motel. I felt stupid for how badly my hands were shaking when I brushed my teeth. It wasn't just fear. It was the thought that whoever tied that totem had been close enough to watch me without making a sound. When I hit the highway, I told myself I was fine. Just squatters, like the sheriff said. People hiding out where no one would bother them. But the truth is, that explanation never sat right. Squatters don't stand in silence under camouflage nets, staring at the sky. They don't tie fresh totems to fences seconds after you pass. I still hike, still fly the drone, but never anywhere near Tonopah. And if I see a fence strung with warnings or talismans, I don't go near it. I don't stop. I don't even slow down. Because that day taught me something I can't unlearn. Some fences aren't meant to keep us out. They're warnings, plain and simple. Warnings that whatever's on the other side is better left undisturbed. And I listened. I was 26, 3 months into a solo ride across the country. Oregon to Virginia, that was the plan. I'd already fought headwinds in Kansas, slept behind more churches than I could count, and learned the hard way which gas stations welcomed sweaty cyclists and which ones didn't. By the time I rolled into Kentucky that September, I thought I had seen most of what the road could throw at me. Turns out, I hadn't even come close. It was late afternoon, the kind of early fall day where the sun still pretends it's summer, but the cold in your lungs tells the truth. I was tired and hungry, so when I spotted a sliver of shade near a rusted guardrail, I pulled off. I unclipped my shoes, leaned the bike against the metal, and grabbed a handful of trail mix while looking over my map. That's when I heard gravel crunching behind me. I turned, expecting a car or maybe a farmer pulling into a hidden driveway. Instead, it was a man, alone, walking in the ditch like he'd stepped straight out of the woods. He was in work pants stained at the knees, an old cap pulled low, and in one hand he carried a grocery sack that crinkled with every step. In the other, a hatchet. He didn't swing it or hold it threateningly. He just carried it, casual as you like, the same way someone might carry a hammer back from the shed. I told myself not to panic, but my voice still came out too quick. "Hey, how's it going?" Nothing. He just walked in pace with me, chewing something from the bag. Jerky, I realized when the smell drifted over. Smoky, peppered. He looked at my bike, at the bottles strapped to the frame, then back at the road. Not once did he answer. I tried again. Need directions? My voice was forced cheerful, Midwest polite. He chewed and kept walking. The hatchet hung loose at his side. The road curved ahead, blind in both directions. No houses nearby. My phone showed no signal. It was just me, him, and the quiet. I decided to roll. Clipped in, pushed forward, kept it steady. Not a sprint, not yet. He matched me for a dozen paces, then let me pull ahead. He just stood there in the grass, chewing jerky, watching. I didn't look back again until I was a mile down the road. That night, I pulled into a county park. A pavilion, a bathroom that smelled like damp brick, and no cars in sight. I set up my tent under the roof, fishing line tied to the zipper so I'd wake if anyone touched it. Pepper spray by my pillow. Shoes and helmet where I'd find them in a panic. I ate the rest of my trail mix and read a battered paperback until the light was gone. The quiet pressed down hard. At some point in the night, I woke. Not to a sound exactly, but to a change. The way the air shifts when someone new steps into it. I held my breath and listened. For a moment, there was only the pavilion creaking. Then faint cloth brushing wood. Then silence again. I counted backward from 100 until I drifted off, not really sleeping, just drifting. At dawn, I crawled out of the tent. My bike was still there. My shoes were still where I left them. But something was wrong. My tent pegs were shifted slightly, like someone had pressed a hand against the wall. My food bag was unrolled and folded back neatly. And the pepper spray, the one thing I meant to keep at arm's reach, was gone. I searched everywhere. Under the pad, in my jersey pockets, even under the picnic table. Nothing. My stomach nodded. Whoever came through hadn't taken food or gear, just the spray. Like a message. I packed fast and got back on the road. The next town had a Dollar General. I bought the only spray they sold, meant for dog walkers, and a bottle of water I barely tasted. My hands shook at the counter. The cashier didn't ask why, and I didn't offer. For days after, I couldn't relax. Every time a truck slowed near me, my calves locked. Twice, pickups pulled off into driveways and the drivers lifted 2 fingers in the usual country wave, but it didn't calm me. I camped only at churches or cheap motels where I could lock the door. One motel clerk told me to bring the bike inside so it wouldn't get stolen. I nearly laughed. Someone stealing my bike felt less scary than someone quietly taking the one thing meant to protect me. 5 nights later, I camped behind a volunteer fire station. The chief, a kind man named Toby, told me, "We sleep light. You holler if you need us." I nodded, grateful. I still barely slept. At 3 a.m., when a truck idled at the stop sign out front, I lay there holding my new spray, listening for doors opening. They never did. The truck moved on, but I didn't unclench until dawn. I never saw the man again. Didn't hear him, didn't catch sight of him. He was just gone. But the weight of what he did lingered heavier than if he'd swung that hatchet at me. He'd come into my camp, rearranged my world while I slept, and taken one small thing. Not to rob me, not to hurt me, just to remind me that he could. When I finished the ride and told friends about the highlights, the skies in Kansas, the kindness of strangers, the beauty of Virginia's Blue Ridge, I kept that story buried. Because how do you explain that the scariest part wasn't the hatchet or the man or even his silence? It was the promise in that missing can of spray. The knowledge that someone had chosen to step into my space and leave me with a hole that weighed more than the object itself. And every time I camp alone now, I still check my zipper twice. I still set a whistle by my pillow. I still think about the man in Kentucky who never spoke a word. Because silence, I've learned, can say more than anything. If these stories kept you on edge, remember, people vanish in the middle of nowhere every year, and not all of them are accidents. Smash that like button, subscribe so you don't miss another scare, and comment which moment made you say, nope. And if you've ever called night driving calming, yeah, you'll rethink that after the next video. Click now to watch 4 disturbing night drive horror stories. Because silence on the road doesn't mean you're alone. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.